Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Friday, 9th May 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China's exports surged by 8.1% in April, measured in US dollars, as shipments to Southeast Asia compensated for reduced trade with the US due to tariffs. This export growth occurred despite new US tariffs. Stimulus measures have not impressed investors, who are focused on trade talks and tariff rollbacks. China is unveiling monetary support measures due to the impact of tariffs. China is also increasing its purchases of Russian oil and gas, following Europe's supply cuts, strengthened ties with the Kremlin. SMIC and Huayou, top chip makers, foresee difficulties in the second half of 2025. SMIC's shares fell nearly 7% after an earnings miss. Geely is moving to take its EV startup, Seika, private. Alibaba's Quark launched Deep Search, combining AI reasoning with online search. Unitree addressed a security vulnerability in its robot dogs. Luxury labels like Balenciaga, Versace, and Valentino are reducing discounts in China to maintain exclusivity. Turning to trade relations between the US and China, the two countries are set to hold high-level talks in Switzerland, the first since President Trump's return. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will lead the U.S. delegation. President Trump has suggested potentially reducing tariffs, hinting at potential trade deals. These discussions aim for de-escalation. Global markets are responding cautiously to these developments. European and world stocks rose on hopes for progress. Wall Street saw modest gains as Trump hinted at lighter tariffs. Stocks also fell as traders exercised caution. Asia-Pacific stocks are mixed as investors analyze Chinese economic data. The talks and any potential tariff adjustments are being closely monitored worldwide. In other news, Nvidia is modifying its H20 chip specifically for the Chinese market to circumvent U.S. export restrictions, planning to release it in July. Meanwhile, China has increased its purchase of Russian oil and gas, following Europe's supply cuts during the Ukraine war. Xi Jinping reaffirmed China's dominance over Russia, and both countries issued a joint statement highlighting their cooperation. Finally, Camel Meridian Herbs in Manhattan is concerned that tariffs could harm their business. Del Monte CEO notes the industry is in absolute panic due to China cutting off tungsten exports, driving the need to diversify tungsten sources. The United States and the United Kingdom have struck a preliminary trade agreement aimed at easing tariffs and trade restrictions, providing a boost to our stock. However, analysts caution that the deal's broader impact on trade talks, especially with China, might be limited. The Trump administration is contemplating a 60% tariff reduction in upcoming US-China discussions, signaling a potential de-escalation in their trade conflict. These tariffs are prompting about 10 family offices of Asia's ultra-rich to reduce or freeze investments in US equities and treasuries, redirecting investors towards alternative opportunities. Despite these trade developments, the average rate on a 30-year U.S. mortgage has remained stable at 6.76%, near its highest level this year, but still below last year's rates. The U.S. is also actively working to attract manufacturing jobs back to the country through incentives and disincentives. Further, the U.S. is looking to expedite trade agreements, particularly to attract funds from the Middle East. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom and the United States have reached a preliminary trade accord to ease trade ties, the first such agreement since Liberation Day. While this agreement provided a lift to global markets, its impact on UK stocks has been mixed. The deal initially triggered a rebound in the GBP-USD exchange rate, which later receded. China's exports experienced an 8.1% increase in April, surpassing market forecasts, although shipments to the U.S. showed a decrease. The U.S. is aiming for tariff reductions in upcoming trade talks with China, potentially leading to a de-escalation of the current trade war. Stocks in Hong Kong and mainland China have remained relatively stable in anticipation of these talks. The U.S. has also imposed sanctions on a third teapot refinery in China for violating sanctions related to Iranian oil. April sales have surged following the imposition of US tariffs, which prompted a rush of device orders. The Australian stock market has experienced fluctuations amidst global trade developments and domestic economic factors. Initial optimism stemming from the US-UK trade deal and Macquarie's earnings report led to gains, with the AS reaching a 2-month high. However, concerns regarding banking gains and losses in the mining sector contributed to a subsequent decline. Costa's acquisition of Australia's domain for $1.90 billion underscores growing interest in the Australian market. The Australian Securities Exchange (ASX) is reassessing NNA rules and proposing IPO reforms to encourage more companies to list in Australia, prompted by backlash against James Hardie and a broader trend of companies seeking an alternative. European Union. The EU is preparing to release a report assessing the impact of US tariffs on Chinese shipments and is considering implementing retaliatory levies on US goods. European stocks generally saw an increase following the US-UK trade agreement, with the exception of London. Air Canada has revised its 2025 outlook downward, citing declining travel to US cities. The TEX, Toronto Stock Exchange, experienced an increase due to potential de-escalation of the US-China trade conflict, with the Federal Reserve's meeting also being a key focus. Global markets. Global stock indexes have risen, supported by the dollar, driven by trade optimism following the US-UK agreement. However, the benefits have not been evenly distributed across all markets. Investors are increasingly looking beyond the US, exploring opportunities in Asian funds. India's financial markets are experiencing significant volatility due to escalating tensions with Pakistan, including reported drone strikes and precision strikes. The Sensex closed at 79,454.47, a loss of 880 points, 1.1%, and the Nifty 50 ended at 24,008, down 266 points, 1.1%, erasing approximately $4 lakh crore, 83 billion, of investor wealth in 2 days. The rupee suffered its worst decline in over 2 years due to the conflict, a stronger dollar, rising crude oil prices, and equity market weakness. Despite the downturn, the BSE mid-cap and small-cap indices outperformed, with select drone stocks and defense stocks like Bharat Forge and HAL surging. India has imposed an anti-dumping duty on some solar glass imports from China and Vietnam for 5 years. India's Swiggy is experiencing cash bleed in the quick commerce sector, while India's appeal for investors dimmed but not derailed by conflict with Pakistan. Pakistan is facing escalating tensions with India, marked by reported drone strikes and precision strikes by India. The two nations have fought 3 full-scale wars since 1947. China, amid escalating tensions between India and Pakistan, has seen its J17 makers stock increase. In trade-related news, India has imposed an anti-dumping duty on some solar glass imports from China for 5 years. The United States' former president, Donald Trump, once referred to India as the tariff king, but now New Delhi is ready to shift its trade policies. Brazil's tourism economy is being spotlighted by India's National Tourism Day, emphasizing cultural and economic initiatives. Romania's leu is poised for its worst week in 16 years, amid global market jitters, partly influenced by escalating tensions between India and Pakistan. United States trade relations are set to improve with the United Kingdom, as President Donald Trump has agreed to reduce tariffs on British autos, steel, and aluminum as part of a planned trade agreement. A 10% tariff on UK goods will remain despite the reduction. The anticipated UK-US trade deal has spurred positive reactions from investors, contributing to a rise in stock prices on Wall Street. Analysts suggest that a minimum tariff of 10% could be the most favorable outcome for other countries and trading blocs. Turning to the United Kingdom, the nation is navigating a complex economic environment, and the Governor of the Bank of England, Beau, emphasizes the necessity of rebuilding trade relationships with the European Union. Investors are encouraging pension funds to increase their investments in UK equities. However, initial public offering, IPO, candidates are postponing their plans due to the impact of tariffs, hindering the UK's IPO market. The UK's chief statistician has stepped down amid growing mistrust in key economic data. Furthermore, the UK is set to sanction up to 100 oil tankers in Russia's shadow fleet. Meanwhile, in Russia, President Vladimir Putin, with Xi Jinping at his side, commemorated the World War II victory as the war in Ukraine continues. Finally, regarding artificial intelligence, Li Auto CEO has publicly praised DeepSeek founder Liang Wenfeng's disciplined leadership and innovative contributions to the field. Saudi Arabia is undergoing a massive economic transformation fueled by the Public Investment Fund's PF aggressive investment strategy, particularly in sports, with nearly $5 billion and $13 into women's professional golf, boosting the ladies' European tour. High-profile visits from figures like Donald Trump and CEOs of BlackRock and Citi signal the kingdom's ambition for major U.S. deals, with ongoing negotiations for a Saudi-U.S. agreement, potentially omitting normalization elements. The country is rapidly embracing a cashless economy, driven by the surge in fintech, positioning Saudi Arabia as a regional leader in this sector. The Saudi insurance sector is also booming, reporting a substantial $960 million profit in 2024. ADNOC Distribution is expanding its footprint in both Saudi Arabia and Egypt, reporting record fuel sales. In a move reflecting evolving labor regulations, Saudi Arabia has banned questions infringing on personal freedom during job interviews. Furthering its industrial diversification, Korea and Saudi Arabia jointly hosted a business forum focusing on advanced industries, while Seidel and Saudi Arabia signed an MOU to explore local packaging operations. The Saudi aviation industry is experiencing rapid growth and showing significant ambitions. The nation is also positioned to potentially influence global oil prices. Turning to Iran, the country boasts remarkably low gasoline prices, even cheaper than those found in Saudi Arabia and Russia. China is currently navigating a complex economic landscape as investors closely monitor potential trade discussions, with the United States seeking signs of eased tensions. These talks could significantly impact the global market. Simultaneously, Beijing is assessing the implications of a recently forged trade agreement between the UK and other nations. This agreement may shift trade dynamics and require strategic adjustments. Turning to the United Kingdom, the nation is analyzing the potential benefits and challenges presented by its new trade agreement, carefully weighing its impact on various sectors. The agreement aims to foster economic growth. However, its long-term effects are still being evaluated. In the United States, Wall Street is reacting cautiously to the uncertainties surrounding U.S.-China trade relations, with market fluctuations reflecting investor apprehension. The Federal Reserve's monetary policy decisions are also under scrutiny. Analysts are trying to predict how these policies will influence economic growth and inflation. Russia remains deeply involved in the conflict in Ukraine, with President Putin vowing to achieve victory. Former U.S. President Trump is reportedly seeking a truce between the warring nations. Russia commemorated the 80th anniversary of Nazi Germany's defeat with a Victory Day parade in Moscow's Red Square, showcasing drones used against Ukraine. The event saw the presence of Xi Jinping and other global leaders, during which a commitment to stronger ties between Russia and China was affirmed. In occupied regions of Ukraine, a pro-Russian communist group unveiled the first Stalin monument. Regarding the economy, Russia intends to use fiscal reserves to balance the 2025 budget and finance its expenditures, despite a widening budget deficit of 1.5% of GDP between January and April because of accelerated spending. The Kremlin suggests that the U.S. is beginning to understand Russia's stance, and conversations are happening about Russian gas flows to Europe. Taiwan's Cathay United Bank is pivoting towards regional dominance, focusing on Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. Chairman Andrew Kaur and EVP Benny Miao are leading this strategic shift. Taiwan's stock market has risen, reflecting optimism regarding U.S. trade. The island nation has seen a nearly 30% surge in exports, bolstering its currency, driven by accelerated tech orders ahead of potential U.S. tariffs. Both TSMC and SMIC reported revenue increases for April, with TSMC attributing sales growth to U.S. tariffs, causing device order rushes. MOL is expanding its footprint in Taiwan's offshore wind energy sector via a 495 NW project. Taiwan has allocated a special budget to counter the effects of global tariffs. Separately, Taiwan has voiced criticism of Russia and China for allegedly misrepresenting the history of World War II. Japan is facing economic restructuring as Panasonic plans to dismiss 10,000 employees to streamline operations and concentrate on emerging sectors. The industrial sector is evolving. Foreign investment in Japan's stock market is on the rise, encouraging greater participation from domestic investors. The Nikkei stock average has climbed to a high not seen in over a month, fueled by positive sentiment surrounding trade discussions. Stocks have closed higher, with the Nikkei 225 showing a 1.51% increase. Real wages in Japan saw a decrease in March, even as consumer spending rose. Fraudulent trading activities by hackers have increased sharply. In financial developments, Sumitomo of Japan is set to acquire a 20% share in Yes Bank for roughly Rs 13,483 crore, while SMBC intends to purchase a 13.2% stake in Yes Bank for $1 billion. Now is at the forefront of Japan's next wave of buyouts. Pakistan faces economic hurdles amidst tensions with India. The Pakistan Stock Exchange saw volatility, with its website briefly down, and the ASEC 30 index quiet before an IMF bailout decision. Remittances to Pakistan hit a record $31.20 billion this fiscal year, mainly from Saudi Arabia. Pakistan seeks more loans amid the rising tensions with India. In April, India withdrew from a 1960 river-sharing treaty with Pakistan, threatening Pakistan's water supply. South Africa's financial markets keenly follow US-China trade discussions, as the rand's value is closely linked to progress in these international trade talks. Johannesburg is preparing to host the 7th Africa Youth in Tourism Innovation Summit. A primary concern for South Africa remains ensuring adequate food supplies for its population of 43 million, with state-operated wholesale markets playing a crucial role. The search engine landscape in South Africa is largely dominated by Google. The late Kenneth Walker, a 73-year-old journalist, is being honored for his work at ABC News, where he diligently covered Nelson Mandela and brought awareness to South Africa's apartheid policies. Britain's strengthened economic ties with the United States are already yielding tangible results. WHAM, parent company of British Airways, recently placed a $13 biller for 32 Boeing aircraft, signaling confidence in the transatlantic trade landscape. Meanwhile, in the United States, President Trump's trade deal with Britain is facing scrutiny. American automakers argue it unfairly favors British manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover over competitors operating in Mexico and Canada. The ripple effects of trade policies extend far beyond the Atlantic, as evidenced by shifting global trade dynamics. In China, President Trump's elevated tariffs have significantly altered export patterns, with shipments to Southeast Asia climbing, while those to the United States have plummeted by 21%. Europe's corporate sector is showing signs of strain as companies with operations in China report dwindling confidence in future business prospects, despite their success in navigating the initial surge in tariffs. Meanwhile, optimism about a possible de-escalation in US-China trade disputes has fueled a rally in European stock markets, further bolstered by the United States securing individual tariff agreements with the United Kingdom. The Middle East is poised for significant developments as President Trump's agenda unfolds. Ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Gaza are expected to be a focal point. Discussions will also center on oil, trade, and investment agreements to bolster regional economic ties. Potential announcements may emerge regarding chip exports and advancements in nuclear energy, signaling a push for technological and energy cooperation. The United States, under President Donald Trump, has unveiled a fresh trade agreement with the United Kingdom, an announcement that spurred Bitcoin's value past $100,000, marking its first such peak since February. Trump specified a baseline tariff of 10%, suggesting potential hikes for nations perceived as lacking respect in trade dealings with the U.S., directly referencing the UK's advantageous trade status. The United States is considering a substantial decrease in tariffs on goods from China, potentially lowering them from 145% to 80% as trade talks approach in Switzerland. Indonesia's electric vehicle ambitions are facing headwinds. LG Energy Solution, LGES, is possibly withdrawing from a major EV battery investment. The investment was valued at $8.45 billion. This potential exit has raised concerns within the Energy, Mineral, and Coal Suppliers Association. Huayou is being considered as a potential replacement for LG's in the project. Canada's job market experienced a slight upswing with 7,400 new positions added. However, the unemployment rate saw a marginal increase to 6.9%. In airline industry news, Korean Air is set to acquire a 10% stake in WestJet, a Canadian airline, in a strategic move to enhance its footprint in the North American aviation sector. Canadian stocks closed positively, with the S&P/TSX Composite Index gaining 0.37%. Brazil is seeing a gentle rise in its inflation rate, prompting the central bank to adopt a flexible approach to its interest rate policy. Aiming to bolster its small and medium-sized business sector, the International Finance Corporation, AFC, and Banco Industrial have launched a $105 million financial package. The initiative is specifically designed to empower micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSS, within the Brazilian economy. United States. The European wind industry is facing uncertainty due to the lingering impact of former President Trump's policies in the U.S., particularly affecting the previously promising offshore wind market. Industry leaders are recalibrating their strategies and proceeding without assured reliance on the U.S. market. The U.S. has granted authorization to Qatar to allocate funds for public sector salaries within Syria. Mexico. Randy Carr, the CEO of a family-owned business specializing in embroidered patches, has recently inaugurated a large-scale manufacturing facility in Aguascalientes, Mexico. He is now navigating the complexities of operating within a landscape of fluctuating tariffs. Turkey. Turkish Airlines has announced the resumption of its flight operations between Turkey and Russia, effective from May 9th, following a temporary suspension of service. This move is expected to ease travel between the two nations and benefit tourism and trade. South Africa and Air Connect Namibia has publicly voiced its support for the expansion of South African Airways flight service connecting Johannesburg and Windhoek, highlighting the potential for increased regional connectivity. Serbia. Serbia's central bank has decided to maintain its existing interest rates. This decision reflects a careful balancing act between the need to control inflation and the potential risks of slowing down economic growth. Vietnam. Vietnam has labeled tariffs imposed by former President Trump as unreasonable as trade negotiations between the two countries get underway. This initial statement sets the stage for potentially contentious discussions about trade imbalances and fair market access. Nigeria. Nigeria has successfully repaid $3.40 billion in funding received from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, related to the COVID-19 pandemic. This repayment demonstrates Nigeria's commitment to fulfilling its financial obligations. Hungary. Hungary's inflation rate is showing signs of decline, steadily moving towards the central bank's targeted range. This positive trend suggests that the country's monetary policies are beginning to take effect. Vatican City. In a historic move, Robert Francis Prevost has succeeded Pope Francis and assumed the papacy as Pope Leo XIV, marking the first time an American has held this position. Prior to his appointment, Pope Leo XIV served extensively in Peru and was elevated to the position of cardinal in 2023. Egypt and Saudi Arabia. Egyptian company Money Fellows and Saudi firm Enquadlet have both announced the successful completion of recent funding rounds. The details of the amounts secured and their intended uses remain undisclosed. Philanthropy. Bill Gates is reportedly considering winding down the Gates Foundation, his globally recognized charitable organization. This comes after decades of significant philanthropic contributions following his success with Microsoft, raising questions about the future direction of the foundation's initiatives. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.